The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive bowl with thousands of seats arranged in perfect circles. Jake Miller walked slowly down the center aisle, his black diplomatic uniform crisp and clean. His footsteps echoed in the huge space as alien eyes from dozens of species watched him approach the speaking platform. The humans had been called here for what everyone knew would be the final meeting. Jake had served as Earth's main ambassador for 8 years. He had seen the Council grow more hostile toward humanity with each passing month. What started as simple disagreements had turned into open mockery and then outright punishment. The other species seemed to take pleasure in making things harder for the humans at every turn. The Zilani representative, a tall blue creature with 4 arms, was already speaking when Jake reached his designated spot. Her voice carried clearly through the hall's advanced sound system. She talked about how humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too different from the civilized species of the galaxy. The way she spoke made it sound like humans were some kind of disease that needed to be cured. Behind her, the massive screens showed images of human colonies and ships. Each image had red marks across it, showing all the restrictions the Council had placed on human activities. No human ship could enter the core systems anymore. No human trader could sell goods without paying huge taxes that made business impossible. No human scientist could join the research programs that other species took for granted. Jake listened without changing his expression. He had heard it all before. The Korthic delegate, a creature that looked like a walking tree with too many eyes, stood up next. He spoke about how humans refused to follow proper protocols, how they insisted on doing things their own way instead of accepting the wisdom of species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. The other delegates nodded and made sounds of agreement. The hegemony counselor, Vex, rose from his seat on the highest tier. His species looked almost human, but with gray skin and completely black eyes. When Vex spoke, everyone else fell silent. His voice was cold and final. "The human problem has gone on long enough," Vex said. His words echoed in the quiet hall. "We have tried to guide them. We have tried to educate them. We have tried to show them the proper way to conduct themselves in galactic society. They continue to resist every effort to civilize them." Jake stood perfectly still. He had expected this moment for months. The signs had been clear. First, human ships were banned from certain sectors. Then human traders were charged extra fees. Then human colonies were denied basic supplies unless they agreed to impossible terms. Each restriction was presented as a temporary measure for the good of galactic peace. Therefore, Vex continued, the Council has reached a decision. Humanity will surrender all military vessels to Council authority within 30 days. All human colonies outside the Sol system will be placed under direct Council administration. All human trade activities will be conducted only through approved Council intermediaries. These measures will ensure that the human species can learn to coexist peacefully with the rest of galactic civilization. The hall erupted in approving sounds from the alien delegates. Some of them actually applauded. Jake noticed that none of them looked at him directly. They seemed to be celebrating the end of a long and annoying problem. Jake waited for the noise to die down. He had prepared many speeches over the years, angry speeches about human rights, logical arguments about the benefits of cooperation, emotional appeals about the bonds between species. He had used them all in countless meetings, and none of them had made any difference. Now he realized that words were useless. The Council had made their decision long ago. Nothing he could say would change their minds. They saw humans as inferiors, who needed to be controlled, not equals who deserved respect. So Jake did something that surprised everyone in the hall. He gathered his papers from the podium, put them in his briefcase, and stood up straight. The aliens watched him with curiosity. They expected him to argue, to plead, to offer compromises. Instead, Jake spoke just one sentence in a clear, calm voice. The United Earth Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective. Immediately, the silence that followed was complete. No one seemed to understand what they had just heard. Withdraw from the Council. That was not how things worked. Species did not simply leave. They were expelled or they submitted. Those were the only options. Jake turned and walked back up the aisle. His footsteps seemed louder now in the absolute. Quiet. Some of the aliens started talking to each other in confused whispers. Others sat frozen in their seats, trying to process what had just happened. Vex's voice cut through the growing noise. Ambassador Miller, you cannot simply leave. The council has not dismissed you. Jake stopped walking but did not turn around. The council dismissed humanity when it decided we were not worth treating as equals. We are simply accepting your judgment. He continued walking toward the exit. The whispers grew louder. Some delegates were shouting questions. Others were demanding that Jake return to the podium. A few were calling for security to stop him, but Jake kept walking. When he reached the great doors at the back of the hall, he paused for just a moment. Without looking back, he spoke one more time. His voice carried clearly to every corner of the huge space. Goodbye. The doors closed behind him with a soft sound that somehow felt final. In the hall, chaos erupted. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting over each other. Some demanded immediate action to force humanity back into compliance. Others insisted that the humans were bluffing and would return begging for forgiveness within days. A few wondered if they had pushed too hard too fast. Vex called for order, but it took several minutes for the noise to die down. When it finally did, he addressed the assembly with confidence. The humans will be back, he said. They cannot survive without the Council's protection and resources. This is nothing more than a desperate attempt to gain negotiating leverage. The other delegates agreed. Humanity was young and weak compared to the ancient civilizations represented in the Council. They had no choice but to accept whatever terms were offered. The withdrawal was clearly just a theatrical gesture designed to make them look dramatic and wronged. Outside the council building, Jake walked to his transport with steady steps. His aide, a young woman named Amy, was waiting with a worried expression. She had watched the proceedings on a monitor and knew what had just happened. "Sir," she said quietly, "are we really doing this?" Jake looked up at the alien sky with its 3 suns and strange clouds. Then he looked at Amy and smiled for the first time in months. "Yes," he said. "We are going home." 3 months had passed since Jake Miller walked out of the council chambers. The great alien civilizations had celebrated for weeks after humanity's departure. The Zilani threw festivals on their homeworld. The Korthek declared special holidays. Even the normally serious hegemony allowed public gatherings to mark what they called the purification of galactic society. But now the celebrations were over, and small problems were starting to appear everywhere. Captain Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of a Zilani cargo ship called the Silver Wind. She was not supposed to be there. No human was supposed to be anywhere in council space anymore. But the ship's alien captain had sent a desperate message to the last known human frequency, begging for help. The Silver Wind was stuck in hyperspace between 2 star systems. Its navigation computer had failed, and none of the Zilani crew knew how to fix it. They had been drifting for 6 days, burning through their life support reserves. "The problem is in the quantum matrix stabilizer," Lisa explained to the ships. "Captain, a tall blue creature named Zart. Your people never learned how the human-designed navigation systems actually work. You just use them." Zart's forearms moved nervously. "But surely our technicians can repair any machine. We are an advanced species." Lisa looked at the complex display screen showing the ship's system status. Red warning lights blinked everywhere. "Your technicians know how to replace parts when they break. They don't understand the theory behind how these systems function. There's a difference." She spent the next 4 hours carefully explaining each step of the repair process to the Zilani crew. It was delicate work that required understanding both human engineering principles and alien manufacturing techniques. Most species had simply accepted that human technology worked without bothering to learn why. When the Silver Wind finally jumped back into normal space, Zart looked embarrassed. "This will not happen again," he said. "We will study the human systems more carefully." But Lisa knew it would happen again. and again. All across the galaxy, ships were failing and no one knew how to fix them because the humans were gone. Meanwhile, on the industrial world of Korath Prime, factory supervisor Rick Patterson's replacement was having similar problems. The alien creature, a insect-like being called Dek, stood in the middle of a massive production facility that had been running perfectly. Just 3 months ago, now nothing worked right. The assembly lines kept breaking down. The quality control systems produced random results. The shipping computers couldn't figure out the most basic delivery schedules. The humans made it look so easy, Dek complained to his assistant. They just walked around, looked at things, and everything functioned perfectly. What Dek didn't understand was that Rick had spent years learning every detail of the factory's operations. He knew which machines needed extra attention, which workers were having personal problems that affected their work, and which suppliers delivered materials that met exact specifications. Rick had been the human connection that made alien technology and alien workers function together smoothly. Without that connection, the factory was producing garbage. Half the products coming off the lines were defective. The other half were so poorly made that customers were sending them back. Orders were backing up because no one could figure out how to prioritize the work schedule that Rick had managed effortlessly. In the Outer Rim territories, the problems were even worse. Commander Steve Rogers had led human patrol fleets that kept peace in 17 different star systems. His ships had been fast, efficient, and fair in their enforcement of trade laws. Pirates had learned to avoid sectors where human patrols operated. Now those same pirates were having a festival of their own. Without human ships to stop them, they raided merchant vessels almost daily. The council species that were supposed to take over patrol duties were either too slow to catch the pirates or too corrupt to care about stopping them. On the mining world of Zarian, merchant Captain Bobby Clark had built a reputation for honest dealing over 15 years of trade. He bought raw materials from the miners at fair prices and sold them to manufacturers at reasonable rates. Everyone made a profit and everyone was happy. The Vorthan traders who replaced him saw things differently. They paid the miners almost nothing for their materials, then charged the manufacturers huge prices. When the miners complained, the Vorthans simply found other suppliers. When the manufacturers protested, the Vorthans raised prices even higher. Within 2 months, 3 mining operations had shut down completely. The miners couldn't afford to keep working for the low prices the Vorthan traders offered. The manufacturers couldn't afford to buy materials at the inflated prices. The whole system that Bobby had kept running smoothly for years collapsed in weeks. Dr. Kate Morrison's research stations were facing their own crisis. Her team had developed new crop varieties that could grow in the harsh conditions found on dozens of colony worlds. These crops had prevented famines on planets where traditional farming was impossible, but the research required constant attention. New plant diseases appeared regularly. Climate conditions changed. Soil composition varied from season to season. Kate's team had worked around the clock to develop solutions for these problems and distribute them to farmers across the galaxy. Now the research stations sat empty. The alien agricultural experts who were supposed to replace Kate's team had different ideas about how research should be conducted. They wanted to study each problem for months before taking action. They insisted on following complex bureaucratic procedures before sharing any new developments. Meanwhile, the crops were failing. Farmers sent desperate messages asking for help with plant diseases that Kate's team could have cured in days. The replacement experts sent back forms to fill out and requests for detailed documentation of the problems. On the planet Nexus 7, Colony Administrator Amy Johnson watched her food supplies dwindle day by day. The new crop variety that Kate's team had developed specifically for Nexus 7's acidic soil was dying from a fungal infection. Amy had sent 17 different messages to the Council's new agricultural department. She had filled out dozens of forms. She had provided soil samples, plant samples, and detailed climate data. The response was always the same: your request is being processed. Please allow additional time for proper analysis. Amy looked out at the fields of dying crops and calculated how long her colony's stored food would last. 6 weeks, maybe 8 if they rationed carefully. After that, they would have to abandon the world that 300 families had spent 5 years building into a home. Similar problems were appearing everywhere humans had worked. The efficient shipping networks that connected distant worlds were breaking down because no one understood the complex routing systems that human merchants had developed. Medical facilities were running out of supplies because the human doctors who had managed distribution systems were gone. Research projects were grinding to a halt because human scientists had provided crucial coordination between different alien teams. The council leaders tried to dismiss these problems as temporary growing pains. They assured their populations that other species would quickly learn to fill the gaps left by humanity's departure. They organized committees to study the problems and develop solutions, but the problems kept getting worse, and the solutions never seemed to work quite right. 6 months after the humans left, the galaxy looked like a completely different place. What had started as small problems were now turning into disasters that affected entire star systems. The council members who had celebrated humanity's departure were now holding emergency meetings almost every day. Ambassador Linda Parker had spent 12 years building trust between species that had hated each other for centuries. The Zilani and the Korthak had fought 3 bloody wars before Linda arrived to mediate their disputes. She had worked patiently with both sides, learning their languages, understanding their cultures, and finding ways for them to coexist peacefully. Now, without Linda's careful diplomacy, the old hatred was returning fast. It started with small incidents. A Zilani merchant accused a Korthak trader of cheating him. A Korthak colony ship was denied permission to refuel at a Zilani station. These were exactly the kinds of problems that Linda had handled quietly before they could grow into bigger conflicts, but there was no Linda anymore. The council's diplomatic corps tried to step in, but they approached every problem the same way. They held formal meetings, wrote official documents, and made speeches about the importance of peace. They never bothered to understand why the different species were angry with each other in the first place. The situation exploded when a Zilani patrol ship fired on a Korthak cargo vessel near the disputed border of the Helix Nebula. The Zilani claimed the cargo ship had entered their territory illegally. The Korthak insisted their ship had been in neutral space. Both sides demanded that the council take their side immediately. The council's response was to form a committee to study the incident. They scheduled hearings that would take months to complete. They requested detailed reports from both sides and hired neutral experts to analyze the evidence. While the council debated, both species began moving military ships toward the border. The Zilani mobilized their home fleet. The Korthak called up their reserve forces. Within weeks, 2 large battle groups were facing each other across a few light years of empty space. Waiting for someone to make the first move, Linda would have handled this crisis in 3 days. She would have talked to the ship captains involved, examined the navigation records, and worked out a solution that let both sides save face. More importantly, she would have addressed the underlying territorial dispute that had caused the problem in the first place. Instead, the council was still forming committees when the shooting started. Meanwhile, the galactic economy was collapsing faster than anyone had expected. The Vorthan merchants who had taken over most human trade routes were discovering that running an interstellar shipping network was much harder than it looked. Captain Dan Mitchell had managed cargo flows between 47 different star systems. He knew which worlds produced what goods, which planets needed specific materials, and how to move everything efficiently through the crowded space lanes around major systems. His shipping schedules had been so reliable that entire planetary economies planned their production cycles around his delivery times. The Vorthans saw only the profit margins. They charged higher prices for shipping and offered less reliable service. They canceled routes that weren't immediately profitable, even when those routes served worlds that depended on regular supply deliveries. The result was chaos. Worlds that specialized in manufacturing couldn't get the raw materials they needed. Agricultural planets couldn't ship their food to hungry populations on industrial worlds. Medical supplies sat in warehouses on one side of the galaxy while hospitals on the other side ran out of basic medications. On the research station orbiting Kepler 442, Dr. Paul Wilson had been tracking something that none of the other species had bothered to notice. His team had discovered that certain viruses could jump between different alien species under specific conditions. It didn't happen often, but when it did, the results could be devastating. Paul had developed an early warning system that monitored viral mutations across dozens of species. When his computers detected dangerous changes, he would immediately alert the affected worlds and help them develop countermeasures. His work had prevented at least 6 potential pandemics over the past 8 years, but Paul was gone now, and his monitoring systems had been shut down when the humans left. The Council's medical experts had dismissed his work as unnecessary paranoia. They insisted that cross-species viral transmission was so rare that it wasn't worth worrying about. They were wrong. The plague started on Trilax Prime, a heavily populated world where 7 different species lived and worked together. The crowded conditions and poor sanitation in the industrial districts created perfect breeding grounds for disease. A routine viral infection that was harmless to the native Trilaxians suddenly mutated and became deadly to the Vorthans working. In the factories, within days, the infection had spread to the other species on the planet. Each time it jumped to a new host type, the virus changed slightly, becoming more aggressive and harder to treat. The local medical authorities had no idea how to stop something that kept evolving faster than they could develop treatments. The infected Vorthans carried the disease with them when they left Trilax Prime on cargo ships and passenger transports. The virus spread along the trade routes to dozens of other worlds. Each new planet it reached became another laboratory where the virus could experiment with new forms. Paul's early warning system would have detected the first mutation within hours and triggered immediate quarantine procedures. His treatment protocols would have stopped the spread before it left Trilax Prime. Instead, the Council's medical experts spent weeks arguing about whether the outbreak was even real. By the time they acknowledged the crisis, the plague had reached 17 different star systems and infected 5 different species. The death toll was climbing toward the millions, and no one knew how to stop it. The Council finally tried to contact the humans for help. They sent messages to the Sol system, offering to pay enormous sums for access to Paul's research data. They promised to reconsider their position on human membership in the Council if humanity would assist with the medical emergency. The messages went unanswered. The Sol system appeared to be completely empty. Not just uninhabited, but actually empty, as if every human ship, station, and satellite had simply vanished. Meanwhile, the war between the Zilani and the Korthek was spreading to other systems. The hegemony had sided with the Zilani, while the Dominions supported the Korthek. Trade between the warring factions stopped completely, making the economic crisis even worse. Pirate attacks increased every day as criminals realized that no one was left to stop them. The various species were too busy fighting each other or dealing with the plague to patrol the shipping lanes effectively. On his private ship drifting at the edge of hegemony space, former Council leader Vex stared at the reports flowing across his communication screen. Economic collapse, military conflicts, medical disasters, the complete breakdown of the interstellar civilization that had taken thousands of years to build. All of it had started 6 months ago when a human ambassador had said goodbye and walked out of the Council chambers. Vex was beginning to suspect that they had made a terrible mistake. 1 year had passed since Jake Miller's quiet goodbye, and the Galactic Council was no longer the proud organization it had once been. The Great Hall where thousands of delegates had once gathered now held only a few hundred representatives from the surviving governments. Many species had withdrawn from the Council entirely to focus on their own desperate problems. Council leader Zenth sat alone in his private office, surrounded by reports that painted the same picture over and over again. Total economic collapse. Multiple wars spreading across dozens of systems. Plague outbreaks that had killed billions. Entire civilizations reverting to primitive conditions as their technology failed, and no one knew how to fix it. The numbers were almost impossible to believe. Galactic trade had dropped by 87%. 14 different species were now at war with each other. The plague that had started on Trilux Prime had spread to 43 star systems and shown no signs of slowing down. Pirate attacks had increased by over 400% as law enforcement broke down everywhere, but the most disturbing reports were the ones that detailed exactly how much humans had contributed to galactic civilization. Zenth had ordered a complete investigation 6 months ago, and the results had been shocking even to him. The research team had discovered that humans had been involved in 73% of all successful diplomatic negotiations over the past 20 years. Every major peace treaty, every trade agreement, every resolution to territorial disputes had involved human mediators working behind the scenes. Captain Amy Johnson had led the exploration fleets that mapped safe routes through the dangerous regions of space that separated major civilizations. Her charts and navigation data had made regular travel possible between distant worlds. Without those routes, entire sectors were now cut off from the rest of the galaxy. The space around the Magellan Nebula had become completely impassable after Amy's ships stopped patrolling the area. The nebula created strange gravitational effects that could tear apart any ship that took the wrong path through it. Amy's people had spent years mapping the safe corridors and updating them as conditions changed. Now, merchant ships were disappearing regularly in that region. Some captains tried to use the old charts, but the safe paths had shifted over time. Others attempted to find new routes on their own and were never seen again. The Centauri colonies, which had depended on trade through the Magellan Passage, were slowly starving as supply ships stopped making the dangerous journey. Engineer Bobby Clark's fusion reactor designs had been powering industrial facilities across half the galaxy. The reactors were incredibly efficient and reliable, but they required constant maintenance by people who understood the complex physics involved. Bobby's team had traveled from system to system, keeping the reactors running and training local technicians. With the humans gone, the reactors were starting to fail. The alien technicians could perform basic maintenance, but they didn't understand the underlying principles well enough to solve serious problems. When a reactor's magnetic containment field became unstable, they had no idea how to fix it safely. The first major disaster happened on Vega Prime, where a fusion reactor exploded when the containment field collapsed. The explosion wiped out half the planet's industrial district and killed 3 million people. Similar accidents were happening on other worlds as more reactors failed without proper maintenance. Dr. Sarah Williams had been developing the medical treatments that kept billions of aliens healthy. Her research team had worked on diseases that affected multiple species, genetic disorders that appeared in mixed populations, and the complex drug interactions that occurred when different alien biologies lived together. The Council's medical experts had assumed they could continue Sarah's work without her. They had copies of her research data and access to her laboratory equipment. What they didn't have was her intuitive understanding of how different alien biologies interacted with each other. Sarah had spent 15 years studying the subtle ways that Zilani metabolism differed from Korthik physiology. She knew which medications would work for mixed populations and which combinations could be deadly. Her treatments had been specifically designed for the multicultural societies that existed throughout the galaxy. Without Sarah's expertise, medical care was becoming dangerous for anyone who wasn't a pure member of a single species. Hospitals were seeing increasing numbers of patients who had bad reactions to treatments that should have been safe. The complex medical protocols that Sarah had developed were being simplified by doctors who didn't understand why they were necessary. In the first place, the investigation also revealed something that shocked even Zenth. The humans had not just been helpful members of galactic society. They had been essential to its basic functioning. Almost every system that kept civilization running had depended on human knowledge, human skills, or human mediation. Captain Dan Mitchell's Deep Space Reconnaissance reports had been dismissed as fantasies when he tried to present them to the Council 3 years ago. The other delegates had laughed when Don claimed he had detected signs of advanced civilizations beyond the galaxy's outer rim. They had called his evidence inconclusive and his theories impossible. Now Zenth was reading Dan's reports with growing horror. The evidence was actually quite convincing when examined by experts who weren't determined to dismiss it. Dan had found regular patterns in cosmic radiation that suggested massive artificial structures. He had detected communication signals using mathematical principles that no known species had developed. Most importantly, he had discovered that several star systems near the galactic edge were showing signs of recent industrial activity. Dan had recommended sending a major expedition to investigate these discoveries. He had suggested that contact with truly advanced civilizations might benefit everyone in the galaxy. The Council had refused to authorize the mission and ordered Dan to stop wasting resources on impossible dreams, but Dan had been right. There were other civilizations out there, and they were far more advanced than anything in the current galaxy. The humans had tried to share this discovery with the Council, and the Council had ignored them. Now Zenth realized what had really happened when the humans withdrew from the Council. They hadn't retreated to lick their wounds or hidden somewhere to sulk about their treatment. They had gone to join the advanced civilizations that Dan Mitchell had discovered. The message logs showed the truth. In the weeks before Jake Miller's dramatic exit from the Council chambers, human ships had been quietly moving toward the galactic rim. Not just military vessels, but entire colonies, research stations, and industrial facilities. The humans had been planning their departure for months. They had tried one last time to share their knowledge with the Council through Jake's diplomatic efforts. When that failed, they had simply taken their advanced friend's advice and left the primitive civilizations behind. Zenth looked at the latest casualty reports from the ongoing wars. The Zelani-Korthic conflict had now spread to involve 6 different species. The plague was still killing millions despite the best efforts of the remaining medical experts. The economic collapse was so severe that some worlds had returned to barter systems. The humans hadn't just left the Council. They had abandoned a galaxy that was proving itself unworthy of their help, and somewhere beyond the rim, humanity was probably thriving among civilizations that appreciated cooperation over domination. 2 years after Jake Miller's quiet departure, the galaxy had become a place that no one would recognize. The great trade routes that had connected thousands of worlds for centuries were empty now. Most planets had turned inward, focusing on survival rather than cooperation. The dream of a united galactic civilization had died with barely a whimper. Zenth stood in what remained of the Council chambers, looking at the handful of delegates still trying to maintain some form of government. Where once thousands had gathered to debate the future of the galaxy, now fewer than 50 representatives sat in the vast empty space. Their voices echoed strangely in the hall that had been designed for much larger crowds. The latest reports were worse than ever. The Centauri colonies had finally been abandoned after their last supply ship disappeared in the Magellan Nebula. 3 entire species had gone extinct, not from war, but from diseases that Dr. Sarah Williams could have cured easily. The industrial worlds that had powered galactic civilization were dark now, their fusion reactors cold and silent after too many accidents had made them too dangerous to operate. But it was the discovery on Kepler 442 that had finally broken Zenth's last hope. The research station where Dr. Paul Wilson had worked on viral monitoring had been abandoned for over a year. When a salvage crew finally reached it, they found something that Paul had left behind in his personal files. It was a complete record of every contribution humanity had made to galactic civilization, documented with careful precision. Not just the obvious things like trade routes and diplomatic negotiations, but thousands of small details that no one had ever noticed. Human janitors had cleaned the Council buildings using techniques that prevented the spread of cross-species infections. Human cooks in the diplomatic quarter had developed recipes that were safe for delegates from dozens of different worlds to eat together. Human teachers had created the educational programs that allowed young aliens to learn about other cultures. Without developing the prejudices that had caused so many wars, the record went on for thousands of pages. Every human settlement, every human job, every human innovation had been carefully cataloged. Paul had known exactly how integrated humanity had become with the rest of galactic society. He had also known what would happen when they left. At the bottom of the file was a personal message that Paul had written just days before the human exodus began. It was addressed to whoever might find it someday, and it explained everything that Zenth had been too proud to see. "We tried to tell you about the civilizations beyond the rim," Paul had written. "Captain Dan Mitchell brought back proof that there are thousands of advanced species out there, living in harmony and working together for the good of everyone. They sent representatives to meet with us 3 years ago. They wanted to invite our entire galaxy to join their confederation of peaceful worlds." Zenth felt his blood turn cold as he read the next part. "We brought their offer to the council. We explained that these civilizations had technologies that could solve every problem we face. Clean energy that could power entire star systems without risk, medical techniques that could cure any disease, transportation methods that could connect the most distant galaxies in minutes. They were willing to share all of it freely. The council had rejected the offer." Zenth remembered the meeting now, though he had forgotten it until this moment. Jake Miller had made a presentation about contact with extragalactic civilizations, and the delegates had laughed at him. They had accused the humans of making up stories to gain importance in council politics. "The advanced civilizations were disappointed but not surprised," Paul's message continued. "They told us that most young species go through a phase where they think they are the center of the universe. They said they would wait for our galaxy to grow up and learn humility. They estimated it would take about 500 years. But the advanced civilizations had made humanity a different offer. If the humans wanted to leave their primitive neighbors behind, they would be welcome to join the Galactic Confederation immediately. All they had to do was prove they were ready for true cooperation by walking away from the Council's arrogance, without violence or revenge. That is why we left the way we did," Paul had written. "Not because we were angry or hurt, though we were both. We left because we had been offered something infinitely better than what this galaxy could provide. We had been invited to join civilizations that were millions of years more advanced than anything here." The message explained what had happened to humanity after they disappeared. The advanced civilizations had provided them with ships that could travel between galaxies in days. They had given them worlds to colonize that were more beautiful than anything in their home galaxy. Most importantly, they had welcomed humans as equals and partners rather than treating them as inferiors who needed to be controlled. "We are thriving now," Paul had written. "Our children are learning from teachers who have studied the secrets of the universe for longer than our galaxy has existed. Our scientists are working on projects that will benefit billions of species across dozens of galaxies. Our diplomats are helping to bring peace to conflicts that have lasted for millions of years." But the message ended with a warning that made Zenth's hands shake as he read it. "The advanced civilizations know what is happening in our old galaxy. They can see the wars, the plagues, the economic collapse. They are saddened by it, but they are not surprised. They have seen this pattern many times before in other young galaxies." According to Paul's message, the Galactic Confederation had strict rules about interference with primitive civilizations. They would not intervene to stop the chaos, even to prevent extinctions. They believed that species had to learn from their own mistakes, no matter how painful those lessons might be. "They will wait," Paul had written. "In 500 years, when the surviving species have learned humility and cooperation, they will make the offer again. If those species are ready to join the galactic community as equals rather than trying to dominate it, they will be welcomed." But Paul had added one final, crushing observation. "I do not think many of the current species will survive that long." Zenth set down the message and looked around the empty council chambers. The building had been magnificent once, a symbol of galactic unity and cooperation. Now it felt like a tomb for dreams that had died from arrogance and stupidity. He walked to the great windows that looked out over the council world's capital city. The skyline that had once sparkled with the lights of 1,000 different species was dark now. Most of the aliens had gone home to their own worlds to deal with problems that were too big to solve. The few who remained were fighting over the scraps of what had once been a great civilization. In his final log entry as council leader, Zenth wrote the words that would be found centuries later by archaeologists studying the ruins of Galactic civilization. We thought we were gods among primitives. It turns out we were primitives who cast out the gods. Outside his window, the first of the winter storms was beginning. Soon it would cover the empty city in snow, hiding the evidence of what had once been the center of galactic power. Somewhere beyond the rim of the galaxy, humanity was building a better future with civilizations that understood the value of cooperation, and in the cold halls of the abandoned council building, the galaxy's dark age began.